My name is Demircan. I am the author of Big Little Politics, and today we're going to learn about politics in the first of 10 Big Little lessons that I'm putting together. So before we jump in, just to clarify, some may call what we're about to do politics, others will say it's government or civics. It's really all of those things. We're going to be taking a look at the American political system as a whole, between the structure of our government, the different elected and also some appointed positions that reside within it, the roles and functions of these positions, and also how it all plays out in practice. This is not just theoretical. This is also very, very practical, and learning about it in a practical way will make it more interesting, and it'll also help us learn it better. So that kind of leads me into the question of who these are for. And although I was inspired to make these because so many of our students are at home because of the coronavirus, they're studying from home and working from home, there's really something for everyone. This is stuff that we should all know, but we don't all know, and hopefully I can help kind of present it all in a clear and concise and fun way. And I can't guarantee that it's going to be fun. I think it's fun, but I'm also the one making them. So come along with me. Let's get to the title sequence, which I'm very excited for, and I hope you enjoy. So here we have the cleverly titled Big Little Lesson Plan, Understanding Elective Politics, and if you notice, it says CT here. That means Connecticut. I live in Connecticut. I work in Connecticut. This does not only apply to people who live in Connecticut, although it applies best. The reason behind this is every state and every town is slightly different, and it's impossible to really speak about them all in purely general terms. So I'm going to look at Connecticut, and I'm also going to specify where things are the same in other states and where things differ, and also where to look if you want to learn that information about a different state. So our first lesson is going to be on the government structure. There are 3 layers and 3 branches. You probably have heard of all of them. We're just going to run through them. So if you live in Connecticut, these are the positions that will appear on your ballot at some point. And by the end of these, you're going to be able to talk about all of them. You're going to have this memorized. Right now, just take a look, see what you recognize, see what you don't. You may be wondering why the judicial branch is so empty. No, probate court judges are not the only members of the judicial branch. The reason behind that is most of them are appointed offices, so you don't vote for them. They're either appointed by the president on the federal level or appointed by the government on the state level. Probate judges are the exception in Connecticut. They're directly elected. And in other states, there will be different policies regarding the election of judges, so some will elect all of them. So if you look at the municipal level, there are different forms of government. Each town gets to select their own. And if you look at what's before the ampersand, that is the legislative arm, and after is the executive arm. And they're kind of paired together like that. And in Connecticut, these are the 3 forms that'll be used. In other states, there are some variations on that, and some of them will have different names. We'll also talk about that later. But in order to really understand all of this good stuff in the middle, we really need to understand what's along the axes. So we have the branches at the top, and we have the layers on the side. And you may be wondering why we have all of these. It makes it really complicated. It adds a lot of positions to the mix. But that is so power isn't concentrated. And that was the main goal of our founding fathers. They really wanted power to be divided. So you may be thinking, what would happen if we did not have any of these along the axes? And yep, there you go. So if this were the case, our lessons would be a lot easier, but our lives probably would not be. So we're going to look at all of these, understanding the layers and also the branches. And we're really lucky to live in a country that allows us this power to elect so many different positions. But the best way to utilize that power is to understand what they all are and what they all do, because a lot of people will go to the polls and they won't really understand what they're voting for. They'll just bubble names in, and some, we know, don't even go to the polls at all. So moving on to the three layers of American government. They're federal, state, and municipal. And federal just means the federation, and a federation is just a country made up of states. So for all of us, America is the federation in which we live. State, that speaks for itself. It's just one of the 50. For the purposes of this video, we're looking at Connecticut. And then we get into municipal, and that is the smallest unit of government. And in Connecticut, that's either going to be a town or a city. In New England states, they're smaller, they're denser, and they're more colonial, so the towns are really important. If you get into some bigger states, especially in the Midwest or out west, counties are what they'll use. It's just a group of towns, and some places will use townships or boroughs, which are smaller than counties, bigger than towns. So here I put in my information, USA, Connecticut, and Glastonbury. That is the town that I live in. It may also be the town that you live in. And what this really determines is what laws you are subject to. So different layers of government have different laws, and they all work together and kind of compound on one another. So right now, I am subject to laws from all of these. I am subject to federal law, state law, and municipal law, depending on where I live. And it's important to note that for an individual, it's not where you live that will dictate what laws you're subject to. It is where you are. It just so happens that right now we're all where we live. But just to give an example, let's say, for some reason in Connecticut, watermelon is illegal, but in Massachusetts, watermelon is legal. Even though I live in Connecticut, can go to Massachusetts. I can buy watermelon. I can eat watermelon. If I try to bring that watermelon back to Connecticut, then it's not legal. Same thing goes if you live in Massachusetts. You can come to Connecticut, but you better leave your watermelon behind. And here are just some examples of the different types of laws that exist at each level. I'm not going to go through all of them. Under federal law, supreme laws of the land cover the things that are in the Constitution. So these are the most foundational laws that protect all Americans. So free speech, freedom of press, all of that good stuff. The state law has a bit more control. Things like the drinking and driving age are set by states. And then municipal law, charter structure just means the different organization of the government. That's why they can all be different. Building and permitting is controlled by municipalities. So if you want to build a 2-story building, it could be in a 1-story zone and you can't do it. That's determined by the municipality. And you may notice that I put down taxes for all of them. And that's not just because we live in Connecticut. The government really runs on taxes. It's funded by taxes. They're levied on individuals and businesses, and with that money that they bring in from taxes, they make budgets each year. They use the money to pay for social programs, for infrastructure like roads, the salaries of employees. They all employ people, so that's why we pay taxes. And we're not going to get into a discussion of how much we should pay in taxes. And this really simplifies it, but the distinction isn't so easy. There aren't really cut and dry rules about which laws fall into which layer. So just to give some examples, I have gun control down. Now, some believe that we need to put restrictive gun legislation through on the national level. It'll affect every American. Others will say that should be left to the states. So some states like Connecticut can have more restrictive gun laws, and other states like Texas can have more lax laws. Plastic bag use. So this is something that usually starts on the municipal level. So I went to college in Massachusetts. The city of Cambridge had a plastic bag ban, but the city of Medford did not. So depending on which grocery store you went to, you could use the plastic bags or they wouldn't have them. But recently Connecticut passed a statewide ban on plastic bags. And then I have education standards down. So you may remember something called Common Core. That came from the Obama administration a few years ago. And that was federal regulations on our educational standards that apply to everyone. We also have educational standards on the state level. And then we have some on the municipal level. So you go to a school, they'll have different learning standards and benchmarks and all of that stuff. Those are going to be set by one of these bodies. And the thing with this is when you understand the different layers, you can vote for candidates who agree with you on these. So if I believe that plastic bag use should not be restricted by the state, then I will vote for candidates who agree with me on that. Now moving on to the branches. This is a little more complicated, but it's also more interesting. So at some point in your life, unless you are very young, you've probably seen some sort of graphic like this. It shows the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. It'll show, this is a picture of the U.S. Capitol under legislative, the White House under executive, and the Supreme Court building under judicial. And these are just the highest houses of each branch, all located in D.C., all a part of the federal government. And under it, there's always some sort of really vague sentence like these. And a lot of people will memorize them and they won't really understand what they mean. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to break down the name of each branch. I'm going to break down what these sentences are beneath them. I'll put up some of the main duties, but we'll save those for the individual videos. And also, I will give an example of what each branch does in the context of this coronavirus crisis that we're living in right now. If you watch the news, you see there's a lot of political activity, but you may not understand who's doing what and what rules govern what they do. So right under here, the Founding Fathers also set it up like this. It's called the separation of powers, and they interact with each other through a system called checks and balances. So you may be wondering, again, why we have it like this, why it can't just be one. And bam, once again, it's just so power isn't concentrated. Different houses have different says. One can't take it over, and the intent is that the interests of the people will be best preserved. So now we're going to look at the legislative branch, which is tasked with creating the laws. And really, you can learn a lot about the legislative branch just from the name. So legislative comes from the Latin legislatio, which means to propose laws. So what branch of government proposes laws? The legislative. Where do you do that? A legislature. And who are the people who do this? They're legislators. So they will make laws, but they all originate as bills. And there is a process of how a bill becomes a law. You may have seen there is an old cartoon song video from the School of Rock that goes through all of this. It's a piece of history now. So if you've never seen it, your parents have definitely seen it. And I'll link it so you can look it up and get a little sneak peek of how that works. And there are some rules on how it kind of makes its way from that original bill that's introduced in the legislature to becoming a law. And the big thing is it has to pass both houses before it's sent to the executive branch. And you may be wondering, both houses, I thought it was one branch. But on the federal and state levels, there are two houses of the legislature. There's an upper house, the Senate, and a lower house, which is the House of Representatives. They have different numbers of representatives in them, but we all have representation at each of them. So I have the numbers right here. And on the municipal level, you do not have two houses like this. It's done on a smaller level. Sometimes in some bigger cities especially, you'll have them broken into districts, so you have a representative from wherever your neighborhood is. But most of the time, especially with the small and medium-sized municipalities, they're at large. So that just means the representatives represent the entire municipality. And again, why do we have these two houses? It's so power isn't concentrated. If one house doesn't like it, it can't go through. You need both of them to pass it. So here, you may be wondering what the legislative branch is doing during the coronavirus crisis. And right here, I just have an article from a few days ago. And it is when Trump signed the coronavirus relief legislation into law. So although it starts with talking about Trump, the important part is that this legislation, which is the coronavirus relief package, it includes free testing, paid emergency leave. Like, this is created by the legislative branch. It's created by the House. It passed the Senate, and then it went to the executive branch. Then we move on to the executive branch, which they say it's enforcing the laws. So that makes me think of like a police officer. But you can learn a lot about the executive branch by looking at the name. So it's called executive. And what else are executives? Well, we have executives in business. We have corporate executives. We have chief executive officers. These are basically bosses of sorts. So you may have a boss. If you don't have a boss, you probably have a teacher. They really serve a managerial role, so they do not have supreme power. If you have a boss who exercises supreme power, then they're more like a dictator, I guess. But this is honestly more like a manager. They don't make the rules, but they implement them. And they tell you what to do, and if they really don't like a rule, then they don't need to implement it. So both the president, who is the executive at the federal level, and the governor, who is the executive at the state level, have the power to veto or to sign laws. So if a piece of legislation passes both houses of Congress, it goes to the desk of the executive, and they can veto it, which means throw it away, or they can sign it into law. And it really gives them the final say. There are also some other roles. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces or the National Guard puts them in charge there. And they don't make legislation, but they set the agenda. So they each give annual addresses at the beginning of the year. And it's basically when they say what they want to accomplish, how things have been going. And on the municipal level, we have a mayor or a selectman, or sometimes you have a town or city manager. The big difference between these is a manager is an employee, so they don't have a partisan affiliation. You don't vote for them. A mayor or a selectman is elected to the position, and they're a political official. So now, during this coronavirus crisis, the executive branch is very important. First of all, that's the branch that is giving press conferences all the time. So every day you see the president, some days you see the governor on TV. They address the people. So they're the ones who we follow in times of crisis like this. They're the boss. I mean, they're the people in charge, really. And the executive branch does not just consist of a president or a governor. There's also a cabinet. And we have all of these different departments with more specific functions. They each have a head called the secretary. And all of those secretaries come together and they make the cabinet, which is appointed, not elected, appointed by the president. Off on the other side, we do the same thing at the state level. So here we just have the governor giving that press conference. And I guess aside from addressing us and updating us, they also can do a lot to protect us. So if you look right here at this headline, Trump deployed hospital ships from the Navy to coronavirus hot zone. This is not creating any new laws. This is really just telling them where to go. So we have these ships. We need them in these places because we have a lot of people who need to be in the hospital. So he is just ordering them there because he is an executive. He's a boss. Then here we have this headline that Governor Lamont closes schools in Connecticut due to this virus as well. Again, it doesn't require making any new laws. All he has to do is say, school is done, study from home, and he makes that order. And because of that, I'm making these videos. So that sounds like a pretty boss move to me. And then finally, we have the judicial branch, which is in charge of interpreting the laws. I never really understood this sentence, interpreting the laws. It doesn't really make the most sense intuitively, but when you explain it, it starts to. So it's just starting by looking at the name judicial. This just means judge. So it even has the first three letters of judge in the name. It's just a branch of judges. And when there are questions of law, they're the ones who resolve it. So they're all lawyers who work as lawyers and eventually rise the ranks and become judges, and it gives them the say to settle disputes. And you may be wondering, well, law is law. What kind of disputes can you have? A lot. So just to give a really basic example, under the First Amendment of the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, we have freedom of speech. So say we have a situation where someone uses hate speech. They say something really mean, they want to hurt someone with an illegal watermelon, I don't know, it could be anything. There is a dispute over whether that would be covered under freedom of speech. So some people would think, okay, well, this is speech. I have the freedom to say whatever I want, so it's legal. And some will say, not necessarily. It's not that simple. This is hate speech, so it is not legal. That's really why we have judges. And they make up the court system. So we have a federal court system, we have a state court system. Some places will have a municipal court system as well. So in the state of Connecticut, it's very similar to how things work on the federal level. The governor is the one to appoint the judges, and the General Assembly, which is the legislature, will confirm them. And the exception is the probate court, which has judges representing smaller districts all across the state, and we just elect them directly. They're on the ballot with all of these other positions. And we'll have a lesson all about this. So you may be wondering, what is the judicial branch doing during this coronavirus crisis? And the answer is just trying to practice social distancing. And while that may sound like a joke, it's actually a serious problem they have. They've just suspended court activity because they can't have all of them in the chamber together. So here we have our big little lesson plan again. And we have finished our first lesson, kind of our general introductory overview, talking about the government structure, giving you a taste of the layers and the branches, and also all of the stuff that we're going to be speaking about in the coming lessons. I hope you're excited. I'm excited, if that means anything. So thank you. Like our page on Facebook, subscribe to our page on YouTube, and share.